What's going on, guys? Patrick from THG here. Welcome back to the channel. Today is part one of NHL Weekly Recap. This will be for August 17th through the 23rd. We're still a month away from the regular season, but we have a lot of pieces of news to share. We have some contract re-signings, contract extensions, some PTOs, and of course, some Olympic news. Olympic 2026 is coming up. Super excited about that. But of course, with all my videos, guys, if you have any suggestions, anything you want me to cover a little bit more in depth, anything you'd like me to talk about in these videos, please let me know in the comment section down below. But with that being said, let's just get straight into it. So, of course, as a Blackhawks fan, we got to start off with the Frank Nazar contract extension. It is for 7 years, $46 million at 6.5 AAV. Nazar is 21 years old and had 12 goals, 26 points in just over 50 games last season. One thing I want to note as well is that this contract will not kick in until 26-27. So he has one more year left on his rookie deal, and then the 7-year extension kicks in. I believe this is a awesome play by Kyle Davidson, the Chicago Blackhawks, and Frank Nazar. All parties won in this situation. For him to get locked up this early with this much term is an awesome job by Kyle Davidson. I think it's something that we're going to start seeing a little bit more of around the league. He had a great end of the season last year. I believe he had 10 points in his last 11 games. And of course, he absolutely tear it up for USA at the Worlds, who ended up winning the gold. Great team, great competition. He showed out very well with some great competent teammates. I'm super excited about this because Nazar, he really gives me a lot of Mitch Marner vibes with the way he plays. He can play the penalty kill. He gets in deep. He's a fast skater. He has a lot of offensive upside. He can set guys up. But overall, he's just a gadget guy who has a great motor and someone that I think you would want on your team in the playoffs because he does have a little bit of physicality in his game as well. He does throw around his body. And like I said, he gets in the tough areas and he makes plays. I can absolutely see Frank Nazar being a very good impact player in the top six for the Blackhawks for the foreseeable future. Of course, they still have to fill that out. They have guys like Oliver Moore that just came up last year around a similar time after his college season got done. He will be an RFA next year, so it'll be interesting to see if Kyle Davidson does the same thing with him. Of course, Sam Renzel, Artyom Levshinov, Wyatt Kaiser. But great job by Kyle Davidson. And like I alluded to, this is something that we're going to see a little bit more often with GMs, I believe, because secondly, we have a contract extension for Marco Rossi. He is 23 years old. He got 3 years at $5 million, so 3 years, $15 million. This is almost the complete opposite of the Frank Nazar situation. So he gets a bridge deal after playing the NHL for 4 seasons. He's been consistently a 0.5 points per game player. He had just about 0.8 points per game last year, which I think is only going to rise on a Minnesota team where you have a lot of guys who are underrated and produce very well. You have Eriksson Ek, you have Marco Rossi, you have obviously a lot of great guys on the back end with Faber, you have Kirill Kaprizov, who's a guy who they have to re-sign as well. But for him to get locked up for 3 years at $5 million, pretty good job by Bill Guerin. Awesome for Marco Rossi because, again, he has a lot of upside. He has a lot of potential. He could potentially go into the 80, 90 point echelon in 3 years and then cash out when the cap goes up. I hate to be a broken record, but the cap is going to go up eventually. So, of course, with Frank Nazar, with Marco Rossi, that's only going to improve their chances of getting more money in free agency when they're pending. So, again, very similar to Frank Nazar, very good deal. It's just a lot different because he has a little bit more experience in the NHL and he opted to go for a bridge deal. 24 goals, 36 assists last season. I can see him going in the 30 goal echelon, maybe 30, 35 assists for the Wild, which would be huge at $5 million AAV. If they want to make a playoff push, that's great value right there. And then next we have Victor Olofsson, 1 year, 1.575 million with Colorado. Last year in 56 games with Vegas, he had 15 goals, 14 assists. Not much to say with Victor Olofsson. He did have 28 goals with Buffalo in 23-24. He's a power play merchant. He has 41 of his 105 career goals on the power play. I would have to assume for Joe Sakic to make this move and Jared Bednar as well, they must see him as a PP2 type of guy. He always likes to hang around the left circle and take that one-timer. I think he will get time there, and if he does, he could definitely go back to his Sabres career numbers, which is around 50 points, 25, 30 goals, especially playing with guys who are a little bit more skilled than what he was used to. Because again, only 56 games last year, he was able to get 15 goals. All right production, but at 1 year, 1.57 million, there's no risk on this. I think this is a great deal for Colorado. It's a great deal for Victor Olofsson because he could cash out in free agency next year if he has a great season with Colorado. So overall, three completely different types of contract extensions and signing. Of course, Frank Nazar, long-term deal for a young guy who's a little less proven. Marco Rossi, a guy who has proven to be a legitimate scorer in this league, gets a 3-year bridge deal. And then, of course, Victor Olofsson gets that 1-year temp deal, hopefully getting a good season out of him, and then he can cash out in free agency or re-sign with Colorado next year. So moving on, we have a PTO. It is Milan Lucic getting the professional tryout with the St. Louis Blues. He is 37 years old. I wasn't super surprised by this because he did recently get reinstated by the NHL after going through the whole procedure. And of course, there is a little bit of familiarity with Jim Montgomery and Milan Lucic from the Boston Bruins. We know how Milan Lucic likes to play. He's a tough guy. He'll go in the corners. He's going to lay the body. He's a little bit more of an enforcer. Early on in his career, he had a little bit of offensive upside. Nowadays, I think he's going to be more of a bruiser, third, fourth line type of guy for the St. Louis Blues. Maybe Jim Montgomery and Doug Armstrong believe they need a little bit more size in their lineup. And of course, that's what Milan Lucic would provide. But the familiarity that we see from Jim Montgomery and Lucic would be the only reason I see this really happening. I don't believe he's even going to make the roster. If he does, it would be to kind of slot in over a Zach Boldu, who they had to drop and went over to Montreal. But we'll see what happens in training camp. Of course, there's something that they might see that they did sign him to a PTO. There's obviously got to be a reason that they decided to do that. So maybe he makes the team. If I had to guess right now, I would say he doesn't make the team. But best of luck to Milan Lucic and the St. Louis Blues. So moving on to injury updates, we have Matthew Tkachuk opting to get surgery, and he will be out until January. This is not shocking at all. There was a little bit of a rumbling at the beginning of the offseason, at the end of the playoffs, that Matthew Tkachuk was going to need long-term surgery, which would consider to be an LTIR type of play. So for him, he decided to take the summer, enjoy it, and then get surgery right before training camp. I don't believe this is a big deal. I know a lot of people are on his case about missing the first half of the regular season, but if anyone's deserved the liberty to be able to do this, it's Matthew Tkachuk, back-to-back Stanley Cup champion. The Florida Panthers, it doesn't really matter what seed they are. Of course, if they're the number one seed and they have home ice advantage for the entire playoff, that's going to be advantageous for any team. But for them to get in the playoffs in general, they're going to be completely fine no matter where they play, how they play, what seed they are. So I think they're going to be completely fine regardless if he plays or not for the first half of the regular season. But if they end up being a fourth, 5, or 6 seed, it doesn't really make much of a difference for them. They made some great signings in the offseason. Of course, they were able to re-sign all the major players that they had to. They brought in Jeff Petrie. They brought in Luke Cunnin. They brought in Tarasov. They did a really good job bringing more depth, which they do every offseason. Bill Zito does a great job bringing in guys who are maybe castaways on other teams, but with the system that Florida plays, those guys are really able to relish. Like, of course, we saw Nate Schmidt, for example. He had a great season. He crashed out, getting a great contract with Utah. So overall, Matthew Tkachuk surgery, not a big deal. It's an overreaction if you're overreacting. Not something any Florida fan should really be worried about. And of course, like I said, ultimately he's planning for the Olympics. And after the Olympics, it's going to be all hands on deck for the playoffs. So last piece of information I want to talk about today, guys, is USA Men's Olympic Orientation Camp roster dropped. 44 total players. I wouldn't really read too much into this because you have a lot of guys. Most of the guys who are on this roster either played on the Four Nations team or showed out super, super well in the Worlds. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, Frank Nazar makes the orientation camp roster after a great World Championship. Same with Tage Thompson, same with Alex Tuck, same with Connor Garland. Jackson Lacombe, a very surprise name to make this list, in my opinion. Seth Jones, of course. There's only a handful of guys on this team who are really going to make a push to really slot anybody out from the Four Nations roster. I think you have Tage Thompson, you have Seth Jones, and you have Matthew Knies. Those are the three guys I could possibly see making the Olympic roster who did not make the Four Nations roster. But again, that means you would have to cut three guys out. And a team that made the gold medal game in overtime and lost, they didn't do very bad, obviously, so there's not a lot of change that really has to be made. But when you really think about it, if they want to play that bruiser type of game, because of course they're matching up against Canada, who we can evidently say has more skill, they're going to have to get in the corners. They're going to have a lot of bigger bodies who are going to play hard and physical on the McKinns, on the McDavids, on the Marners, on all the guys on Canada. I could see them slotting in a Matthew Knies. I can see them slotting in a Tage Thompson. But outside of that, Patrick Kane is on the list. He's not going to make the team. Luke Hughes is on the list. He's not going to make the team. Brady Shea's not going to make the team. Brett Pesce's not going to make the team. Neil Pionk isn't going to make the team. I mean, There's just a lot of names here. It's very similar to the Canada roster that I talked about in my TikTok last week or a couple weeks ago, where you have a ton of cool names, and the only people who are really legitimately going to have a chance on that team is the guys who like Macklin Celebrini, who played good at the World, maybe Connor Bedard. But again, they won the gold, so there's no point in changing that roster either. So really massive orientation camp roster here, but not much change is going to be made. Only those three guys. So that's it for this week, guys. We had some re-signings. We had Lucic get a PTO. We talked about Kachuk getting surgery. Then, of course, the USA men's Olympic cap bronzer. My thoughts on that. We'll see what happens in the next week. We're only 1 month away from the regular season, so of course the news is only going to ramp up. But I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.